I was still holding the phone when my daughter's voice came through the line, calm and clear like she was telling me the weather. "Mom, we've decided Christmas this year is just going to be us, our little family. I think you understand." I did not understand, but I said, "Of course, sweetheart, because that is what I have done my whole life." Said of course, said no problem, said whatever you need. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after she hung up. The window above the sink looks out onto the backyard, and I could see the old oak tree my late husband planted the year our daughter was born. It was December, and the branches were bare, and the bird feeder I'd hung in October was swinging a little in the wind, empty. I had forgotten to fill it. I don't know why that's the detail I remember most from that afternoon. The empty bird feeder. Her name is Melissa. No, wait, that was another woman's story, one I read once in a magazine. My daughter's name is Teresa. She goes by Tess now, has for years, since she married a man named Oliver who told her Teresa sounded old-fashioned. That should have been my first sign. A man who renames your child within 6 months of meeting her is a man who intends to remake her entirely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, or at least the beginning that matters. My husband passed 11 years ago. Stroke. He was 64, still working, still talking about the fishing trip we were going to take to Montana. We never took that trip. After he was gone, I sold the house we'd lived in for 30 years and moved into something smaller, a 2-bedroom ranch on Clover Street in the same town, because I didn't want to be far from Tess and the grandchildren. That was the plan. Be nearby. Be useful. Be loved. For the first few years, it worked. I had dinner with them on Sundays. I watched the kids after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I brought soup when anyone had a cold, sat in bleachers at Little League games, drove to dance recitals in the next county over. I was what my own mother used to call a present grandmother. I wore that like a badge. Oliver was polite to me in the way that some people are polite to someone they consider a necessary inconvenience. Handshake at the door, "Great to see you," hand me a glass of water before disappearing into his office. I told myself he was just private. Tess had always had a talent for seeing the best in people, and I trusted her judgment. Or I told myself I did. The first time they asked me for money, it was 3 years after the wedding. Oliver had an opportunity, he said. A business partner, a commercial real estate deal, something about a strip mall outside of Columbus. He needed to move fast and the bank was slow, and could I lend them $40,000 just for 60 days, just to bridge the gap? He would wire it right back. I remember sitting across from Tess at my kitchen table, the same table I've had since 1987, with the little burn mark on one corner from when she was 12 and left a curling iron on it. She looked at me with those eyes, the ones that have been the same since she was 3 days old, and she said, "Mom, it would really help us." I wired the money that afternoon. The 60 days came and went. When I asked, Oliver said the deal had restructured, the timeline had shifted. He would explain it all when the dust settled. The dust never really settled. What came back to me 8 months later was $22,000. Oliver said the rest had gone into closing costs and fees. I didn't push further. I told myself it was fine. A gift, maybe. Parents help their children. That's what we do. What I did not see then, or what I refused to see, was the pattern taking shape. 2 years later, their water heater failed and their furnace needed replacing, and could I help with the down payment on a new HVAC system? I wrote a check for $6,000. A year after that, Oliver's mother came to visit and they needed to redo the guest bathroom, and I lent them $4,000, and that one I genuinely never saw again. There were smaller things too. Groceries during a stretch when Oliver was between projects. The kids' school fees when tuition went up. A car repair for Tess when her transmission went out in March. I want to be honest with you. I gave these things freely. I did not keep a ledger. My mother always said money and family don't mix, and I thought she meant don't be stingy. Don't let money come between you and the people you love. I understand now she meant something different entirely. What changed, or what I finally let myself notice, was the Sunday dinners. It happened slowly. At first it was just one Sunday a month they couldn't do it. Oliver had a work thing, or the kids had a birthday party, or Tess wasn't feeling well. I understood. Families are busy. But then it became most Sundays, and then it became me calling on Saturday to confirm and getting a text back instead of a call, and then the texts started coming later and later in the day, and eventually they stopped coming at all unless I sent one first. I still watched the grandchildren on Tuesdays for a while. That stopped after Oliver said they'd found a place they really liked, a Montessori after-school program. Very enriching, the kids were thriving. He said it like I should be happy for them. I tried to be. My granddaughter's name is June. She was 5 the last time I saw her, which was 14 months before that phone call in December. She used to call me Nana Bea. My name is Beatrice. Bea to everyone who's known me longer than 10 years. June would run to the door when I came and wrap both arms around my leg because she wasn't quite tall enough yet to reach my waist. I have a photograph of that on my refrigerator. Her little face tipped up, eyes squeezed shut, just holding on. The last time I called to ask if I could take the kids for ice cream. Just a Tuesday, nothing special. Tess said she'd have to check with Oliver and she'd let me know. She never let me know. I called back 4 days later and she said the timing just hadn't worked out. I started to understand that I was being managed. There were other things. I stopped being included in family photos on their social media, though I'd see them. Tess and Oliver and the kids at Thanksgiving, at the 4th of July, at someone's backyard cookout I hadn't been invited to. A friend of mine from church mentioned she'd seen them at the Founders' Day parade. I hadn't known they were going to the Founders' Day parade. I used to take those kids to that parade every year. I bought them paper flags at the hardware store, and we stood at the corner of Main and 2nd and watched the fire trucks go by. When Christmas approached that year, I called 2 weeks in advance. I had already bought gifts. I had a ceramic advent calendar I'd been filling for June and her brother little compartments with chocolates and a tiny toy for each day of December. I had Oliver's favorite coffee, the expensive kind from a small roaster in Vermont. I had a cashmere scarf for Tess in the dusty rose color she'd admired when we went shopping together 2 Christmases ago, the last time we went anywhere together, just the two of us. And Tess told me, calm and clear, that Christmas this year was just going to be their little family. I said, of course. I said I understood. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, not in a chair, on the floor, because my legs simply stopped working for a moment, and I sat there with the phone in my lap, and I looked at that oak tree and the empty bird feeder, and I thought about my husband, and about all the Christmases in that house on Delwood Avenue, and about June's little arms around my leg, and I did something I had not done since the week my husband died. I cried until I was empty. Then I got up, washed my face, put the kettle on, and I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the old kind with the red margins, and I wrote down everything, every transfer, every check, every just for now, and we'll pay you back and you know we're good for it. I am not a dramatic woman. I have never been given to scenes or confrontations, but I am, at my core, an organized person. I taught middle school math for 26 years. I know how to add a column of numbers. The total came to just over $94,000. I sat with that number for a long time, not with anger exactly, with something quieter and more clarifying, like the feeling after a fever breaks. I saw things very plainly in that moment. I had spent 11 years making myself smaller and more useful and more available, and in return I had been tolerated and then gradually, systematically excluded, and what I had believed was closeness was really just proximity to my checkbook. My friend Norma, we've known each other since our kids were in elementary school together. She called me that evening the way she always does on Fridays, and I told her everything. Norma is not a woman who minces words. She listened without interrupting, which is rare for her, and when I finished she said, "Bae, you need to call your attorney." I had not thought about my attorney in years. His name is Franklin, and he'd helped me with my husband's estate and with the refinancing of the Delwood house before I sold it. I called his office the next morning. He fit me in 2 days later. I wore my good coat, the charcoal wool one, and drove myself across town and sat in his office with my legal pad and walked him through everything. Franklin is a deliberate man, the kind who takes notes in a precise small hand and asks his questions slowly. He did not express surprise or sympathy in any dramatic way. He just nodded and wrote and said, "All right, let's talk about what we can do." We talked for 2 hours. The first thing I did when I got home was call my bank. I had a living trust that my husband and I had set up in 2003, and Tess was listed as the sole beneficiary, with full successor trustee authority should I become incapacitated. Franklin had been very clear, very calm, and very serious, explained what that meant. It meant that if something happened to me, Tess, and by extension Oliver, would have immediate control over everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the small investment portfolio my husband had built over 30 years. I changed the beneficiary designations that afternoon, over the phone, in a single call that took about 40 minutes. My nephew Curtis, who is a steady and decent man and has always treated me with genuine kindness, became the primary beneficiary of my retirement accounts. Franklin was already drafting amendments to the trust itself. I also called a locksmith. Not because I thought anyone would come, but because I had given Tess a key to my house years ago for emergencies, and I realized I had no idea whether Oliver had ever made a copy. The new locks went in on a Thursday. I stood in my doorway while the locksmith worked and thought about the last time Tess had used that key, which was 3 years ago when I had a minor procedure and she'd come to check on me afterward. That was the last time she'd been inside my house. I did not call Tess to tell her any of this. I want to be clear about that. I did not do these things to punish her. I did them because Franklin asked me a question I had not been able to answer. If you were incapacitated tomorrow, would you trust the person currently on these documents to act in your best interest? I sat with that question for a long moment, and the honest answer was no. And once I had that answer, the rest followed naturally. I filled the bird feeder. That was the other thing I did that week. I bought a big bag of black sunflower seeds at the hardware store, and I stood on my back step in the December cold and filled it to the brim. By the next morning, there were 3 chickadees and a pair of cardinals. I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee and watched them for a long time. Christmas came. I spent it with Norma and her husband and their grown son who drives up from Cincinnati every year. Norma made her standing rib roast, and I brought a sweet potato casserole and 2 bottles of a decent Pinot Noir, and we sat at their dining room table until nearly 11 at night, talking about nothing important, laughing about things from 30 years ago. It was, genuinely and without qualification, one of the nicest Christmases I can remember. I sent June and her brothers gifts through the mail. I didn't know if they would be given to the children or returned or quietly put in a closet. I wrote each child a card in my own handwriting, the kind of card I hope they keep, and I packed the advent calendar very carefully in bubble wrap. I did not include a note for Tess or Oliver. I just put the return address on the box and sent it. In January, Tess called me. The first call she had initiated in several months. Her voice was different. Not the calm, managed tone from December, but something more uncertain. She said she hoped I was doing all right. She said the kids had loved their gifts. She said June had asked about me. I told her I was doing very well. I told her I was glad the children enjoyed the gifts. And then I said gently and without accusation, Tess, I want you to know that I've made some changes this winter to my estate planning. I've been working with Franklin on updating everything, and I've also changed my locks. I had a new set put in just before Christmas. I'll get you a new key when we see each other next. There was a silence on her end that lasted long enough for me to count to 4. She said, "Oh, okay. Did something happen?" I said, "No, sweetheart, I'm just getting my house in order. You understand." I heard her breath on the other end of the line, and I thought, I have been saying that phrase my whole adult life. Of course. I understand. Whatever you need. And now, for the first time, I gave it back. Not cruelly. Just honestly. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. Before she hung up, she said they should get together soon. I said I would like that. I meant it. I would like that. I love my daughter. I have loved her since before she had a name, since she was a flutter in my chest in a hospital room in 1979, and that has not changed and will not change. But I love her now from a position of clarity that I did not have before, and that is a different kind of love. Sturdier, maybe. Less easy to take advantage of. Norma calls it loving from solid ground. I think that's right. I bought myself a new coat that February. Barn red, the kind of color I would have talked myself out of in a previous version of my life because it was too bright, too much. What would people think? I wore it to church and to the grocery store and to a lunch with an old colleague from the school district, and 3 different people told me it looked wonderful. I believed them. The oak tree in my backyard bloomed in April, the way it does every year, and I planted tomatoes along the south fence. And I started a Tuesday morning walking group with 4 women from my neighborhood, one of whom is 73 and walks faster than any of us. The bird feeder stays full now. I refill it every Sunday without fail. My grandson turned 8 in May. I mailed him a card and a check, enough to buy something he actually wanted, with a note that said I was proud of him, and I hoped we could celebrate together soon. Tess texted me a photo of him holding the card. He was smiling. It is a small thing, maybe. But I kept that photo. I put it next to the one of June on my refrigerator, and some mornings when I pour my first cup of coffee, I stand there and look at both of them for a moment before I start my day. I don't know what comes next with Tess. I don't know if Oliver will ever be someone I can sit at a table with and feel welcome. I don't know if the Sunday dinners will come back, or the holidays, or the ordinary Tuesdays. What I know is that I am no longer waiting. I am no longer making myself small and quiet and endlessly available in the hope that it will be enough to keep me in their orbit. I was 67 years old when I sat on my kitchen floor in December and cried until I was empty. I was 68 when I put on a barn red coat and wore it like I meant it. Those are two different women. I prefer the second one. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like I felt, like you have given and given and given and still somehow ended up alone in a room you can't quite name, I want you to hear this. The love you have for your children is real and it matters and it doesn't make you weak. But it also doesn't have to make you invisible. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to change the locks. You are allowed to fill your own bird feeder and buy a coat the color of something alive and sit at a friend's table on Christmas Eve and laugh until it's nearly midnight. You are allowed to love your children and still choose yourself. I am still learning how to do both at the same time. But I am learning, and on most days, when I stand at my kitchen window with my coffee and watch the cardinals come and go, I think that's enough. I think that's more than enough.